All right. So, on behalf of this violation, the violation being disobeying what you would want to call our fathers, our forefathers, our grandfathers, and for some of you, it's different. You know what I mean by different, as in different ethnic backgrounds, whatever. And ethnic backgrounds, that's it's a loose term, it's a vague term. In mine, as well as my daughter's, and ours, our grandfather's German, and he had a family, and he specifically told his offspring, as well as those who infiltrated his bloodline, he didn't approve. He did not approve in their union. And he was right to disprove it. He was right to rebuke it. As a result of this violation, we went through the most tragic and most despicable of abuses. We were violated in so many different ways and went through unnecessary events. Unnecessary as in could have been prevented. As a result of this disobedience and disregard for this man's wishes being upheld, we suffer still to this day. Our children, or in my case, my daughter, is held captive by someone who don't even speak the English language. She's a slave to a foreigner who was not supposed to be in this country. So the lawlessness of it all, taking advantage of and raping 13-year-olds, abandoning those children with a child. This is supposed to be a grown-ass man. Violating me. How was he able to violate me? Because I was isolated and alienated from the family that cared. And the family that cared, German. But this happened through a trial of events in which people gave their power over to a systemic approach of family orientation in which no family at all exists. As a result of this pseudo family, people are able to do racket. So coming up with program after program, these programs are stemming from the abuse of which we have experienced. And then they're able to basically go, you're a criminal because you use drugs. The reason why of which you use drugs is because you're abused and your brain has become dependent upon said drugs. And if you don't use the drugs, then you basically become a vegetable, narcoleptic, and dead to the world. Instead of being of service to our families, our traditional or approved of families, we became enslaved to those of which we wanted nothing to do with. How are they able to basically leech their way or claw their way into our families? On behalf of the alienation and isolation. And since we were groomed in environments where nothing but abuse and violence occurs, we became desensitized to it, as well as we were unheard and uncared for. People neglected our needs. So once we learned and pathologized that nobody cares to stop it, how can you stop it? It's like a child versus a failure of an adult who takes advantage of your body. And then through the misusage of religion, can gaslight and guilt trip you into keeping the child. Regardless of this false narrative that we somehow loved these individuals that took our children, we were never married to these individuals, and they want to somehow put common law in place of marital law. There was no real contract that came forth from it because we were never in love with them. These were not our partners. These were more so they took us as captive. Whereas they were able to pimp us and whore us out, and they were able to abuse us without any type of consequence, repercussion, or penalty. As a consequence of that, the taxpayer is then exploited and extorted of on behalf of their resources, and then this false narrative of racism or discrimination comes about on the behalf of retaliation to a problem that occurred prior to chattel slavery in America. This starts from, you can say, Spain, North Africa, and Egypt. Egypt, North Africa, and Spain were the three powerhouses, and they were Muslim based, so their religious ideal was Muslim, and they went about abusing the shit out of women and children. As a result of that, they went on to kidnap a bunch of white Christians. The white Christians opened up Pandora's box for retaliation against those three powerhouses of Spain, Egypt, and North Africa. Chattel slavery occurred because of the negligence of those who sold human beings. And they sold them for things like umbrellas and furs and alcohol and guns, firearms. That's how little we cared. How little we meant to those who felt entitled to selling human beings. We were allegedly freed, but no such freeing ever occurred, hence why songs like Big Pimpin' came about. We were never free. And even if we were free, it was never with these ones who get to brag about pimping or being abusive to women, or basically making fun of and berating women, of which show up with the physical characteristics of them, but yet that same sentiment is never directed towards those who are they're the possessors of those traits. We became people of color, and somehow it wasn't recognized as racism when we were taken from our homes. And the reason why we were able to be taken from our homes is because they agreed to this system. They sold us out to this system, and then simultaneously blame those who we come from, the people of which we come from that were not listened to, being our forefathers, our grandfathers, in which case, for us, me and my daughter, the German men that were not listened to. And then the same respect that was not honored to our relatives, of which people claim them to be white, all of a sudden they're given and granted said respects. But as far as our forefathers, no. Disregarding who we're naturally attracted to, disregarding what the children wanted, as if they were more so qualified to having their needs met on the behalf of us suffering so that they can create these programs and all of these pseudo cultural appropriations, such as treatment centers and all this nonsense, of which they're exploiting and extorting others who they claim are the reason why we're suffering these problems. Clearly, they're not good at maintaining a family dynamic, hence why they need resources from other men, women, and children taxpayers. Ask them the question of why on earth they should be making more children if they're in a racist system and they believe that they should preserve their genetics versus those of which were able to prove that they could do so without requiring taxpayers' money in order to do so. Ask them that. Ask them why the women of which they want other men to basically conform to their appearance in our lives. Ask them why, if their women are marrying white men, why on earth it would be respectable and the good thing to do to acquiesce to conforming to an identity of which failed at being able to maintain keeping them as women, so they can just walk off into the sunset and leave behind, or want others to accept this narrative. They couldn't maintain these women that all of a sudden are married to these men. And then as they go over to that side, now the men that are not minorities, they're not colored, they're supposed to somehow acquiesce and want to befriend that one. You don't see a problem with that? I do. Because in the meantime, while we're being raped, nobody wants to notice that. Nobody wants to acknowledge it. Nobody wants to correct it. It just somehow the children are supposed to stay with those who aren't even supposed to be in the country in the first place. The ones who don't want to conform or to basically adapt to the culture that's already here. They came over into this country after already being deported. They can't learn the language, but want my daughter and me to basically be slaves for them, learning their language and then being alienated from their family. And this is somehow normal. I didn't want to have children with a rapist. I wanted nothing to do with these individuals that are in this country illegally. I didn't want to be housed with the one who couldn't obey my grandfather. But nonetheless, it happened. Also that I could have nothing to show for my fucking life. This is a problem. Whatever.